My name is Dan, Dan Allred, and I represent a couple different perspectives here. One is as a board member for the Capital Network, or TCN, so we host this monthly event at the Venture Cafe, which we call the UpStart Roundtable, and we always feature a founder, an entrepreneur, CEO, an investor, someone who is in the startup game and has some wisdom and some war stories and some lessons learned and some things that keep them up all night and all that kind of stuff. So this month we've got Ellen Rubin, which we're really excited about. The other perspective I represent here is as one of the bankers with Silicon Valley Bank. So I run the early stage technology practice for SVB in Boston, and get to work with lots and lots of entrepreneurs and founders and investors, and Ellen is one of those, and we've gotten to work with Ellen in multiple roles. You were VP of Marketing at Netezza.
I was going to say, we started all the way back at Netezza,
Yeah.
and this is my third one with you guys.
So you were at Netezza before I was even living in Boston, but Netezza, and then founder of Cloudswitch, and we're with Cloudswitch all the way through the exit to Verizon, which we'll probably hear more about over the next hour or so here, and then and now founder of ClearSky as well. So this is pretty open. I'm going to kick this off with just a couple of questions to Ellen, just to basically get her talking and telling some stories. But we'd love to hear from you guys and hear you ask your questions, get some perspective. This is invaluable stuff to be able to get the perspective of an entrepreneur who has been through it. I guess we can't say 3 times yet, but 2+ times.
Actually, I had a company I started even before Netezza.
Oh, okay. Well,
so
there you
can
go.
Say 3.
There you go. So
you can go there.
So 3+. That's
right.
Great. So why don't we start there? Why don't you just tell us sort of your how'd you end up being a founder? How'd you end up getting into all this?
Definitely. Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here, and I'm like overwhelmed by how much is going on all around us here. So anyway, I would love to be very interactive. So I'll start with a little bit of an introduction, and then let's just kind of keep it open. I started my first company back in, I want to say, 98. And I was living in Tel Aviv, Israel, and I had gone over there to join the entrepreneurial community because at the time it was really just exploding even faster than what was going on here in Boston, and it just seemed like a great opportunity. I had just finished business school, and my husband and I got on a plane and we went. And I ended up joining an Israeli startup and having an experience of jumping into something, not really understanding what to do. We were all very young and didn't really have much of a clue. And then because we didn't have a clue, a few of us spun out and started our own startup out of that initial startup. And so I always like to say that I did it without ever really understanding the complexity, the risks, the marathon nature of it, and maybe that was the best thing because we just kind of jumped in. I was working with some engineers in Israel. We had an idea. It was real-time personalization for e-commerce, and it was at the moment, there was a bunch of e-commerce stuff that was just taking off at the time, and we just did it. So I moved the company back here. We got it funded. It was an early experience, and the truth about it was we made so many mistakes and we did so many things that were just things that you do because you don't know where things need to get to. That coming out of that experience, which was not a success, we raised $18 million. This was .com era. We raised a lot of money. We got going, learned a lot of exciting stuff, worked with early customers, got the initial product up and running and stuff like that. But the thing kind of just, we kind of hit 2000 and things didn't work out. And at that point, what ended up happening for me was I went to work for Netezza, which at the time was a startup that was being run by people who were much more seasoned. And I went and I worked for Netezza for about 6.5 years. And there I got to see what it was like to sort of say, okay, here's the beginning, and now we get through scale. And then eventually in 2007, we went public. We had 130 million in revenues. It was like a company that I got to see grow into a real, it was really an international scaling kind of an experience. And then I decided that really I'm a founder, and so I better go, because otherwise I'll just stay on and on and on. And so I left and I started Cloudswitch, which is software for companies that want to connect public clouds into their data centers and private clouds in what's called hybrid cloud, that type of a model. And this was early in 2008. that I started looking at it. And I think what without going down the path, I can talk about what happened after that, but the beginnings of the whole experience for me were that I liked working with engineers, and by accident I found out that I liked sitting in a room where it was just a couple of people at a whiteboard and that you were sitting and drawing the initial idea. And that was it was such a strong experience that I thought, okay, I think I might be ready to do it again, but hopefully with maybe a little bit more structure and also a little more like modesty, that okay, there are limitations here. I need to make sure that I bring people into the team with different flavors of experience and that we can start to really scale. So that was my experience. So I always kind of joke that I kind of fell into it in some ways, but what was great for me, I think, was that I got to see what it was like from the absolute beginnings and then understand what it means to take things forward. And there are all these different phases of a company's growth, and they're all so different. So I'm just going to stop. Happy to go in whatever direction, but
How much can you tell us about ClearSky and sort of what brought about this new opportunity?
Sure. Well, so fast forwarding, Cloudswitch got bought by Verizon in 2011, and I stayed for more than a year to run the cloud team at Verizon. And I don't know if it's possible to have gone from one experience to a more different experience than startup, venture backed, early scaling experience to 200,000 employees, right? Verizon's a $100 billion company. And, I knew when we got bought that I probably wasn't going to stay there for too long, but I wanted to make sure that things transitioned well and that my team got put into a good place. And to be honest, Verizon did everything they said they were going to do, and they were terrific to us. But it's just not an entrepreneurial experience. So I left. And for me, what happens next is that I go and I meet 1 million people and look for a technical co-founder that I can work with, because I'm the business. So I always need someone who's a technical idea person who has a really interesting idea around a problem that they can solve, and I can see how I could match it to some of the business issues that I've solved. And so I did that at Cloudswitch with John Considine, and then I was looking to do that again with ClearSky. And I got hooked up with my co-founder, Laz Vekiridis, who is a storage guy who was coming out of a company called EqualLogic that got bought by Dell. You guys may have heard it. They got bought for $1.4 billion, and it was a company that was very, very successful. And he was looking to do something entrepreneurial, and we literally sat for months and months and months. We had an idea. We started to do research on it, and then after 4 months, we killed it. And we just decided it just wasn't the right idea. It wasn't fundable. It wasn't going to be a meaningful thing. So we killed it, and then took a little time, and then we regrouped again on this new idea, which I'm not saying that much about, but it's a storage service idea, and it leverages his storage background with my cloud background. That's probably as much as I can say right now. But we're in stealth mode. We raised $12 million in Series A at the beginning of the year, so we started working on it in the fall, and we were able to get it funded. So that one kind of took. And we decided to go forward.
And did you and Laz know each other, or just mutual contacts?
Yeah. We so Paula Long is somebody people may have heard of. She was the founder of EqualLogic, and now she's the founder CEO of a company called Data Gravity. And she was Laz's boss, and she's like rock star, enterprise infrastructure woman, technical founder. There are hardly any of those people out there. So. I have a lot of respect for her, and so she introduced me to Laz, and she said, I think you guys would make a good team. So, we took it from there.
And she was right.
Well, it took a little bit, but
right.
yeah, it was good.
So, I hear from business-oriented founders all the time who are out looking for a technical co-founder, and sometimes it's a little bit different than what you described. They have an idea, and they're looking for somebody to kind of be able to execute on that idea. Sounds like you were looking to collaborate, basically on everything, including the idea. But people have a hard time with that. Finding that other half of the team.
It's like a needle in a haystack.
Yeah. So what's the, is there a secret? Is there a silver bullet? How do you, for these people in the room, how do you actually do that? Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
And how do you know it's the right? When do you know that
how do you know that's the one?
That's the one.
Right, that's the hardest thing, because there are ideas all over the place. And I think I must have met with about 30 people who could have potentially been technical co-founders or in some way founding partners to me over a course of many, many months. And everybody's got ideas, right? And some of them are like just the seed of an idea, and then others, the person's been working on it for months and they have something very specific that they want to talk about. And it's I don't know what to describe. It's like writing a research paper every night. That's how it feels. So to me, that period of the looking is it's almost harder than when you get going, because when you get going, you're focused. And here, it's almost like you're trying to keep your energy spread widely. It's hard. I mean, I don't think that there's a silver bullet. I think that what happened for me is I knew that I had certain areas of type of customer, type of business problem that I'm interested in solving. So I'm really, don't ask me why, I really am interested in data center problems for enterprise customers. I just love that. And so I wasn't going to do a mobile app, and I wasn't going to do a consumer thing, and I wasn't going to do some new, rent the runway kind of, that was never going to be it. So I could get rid of all of that, and I could sort of keep a little bit more focus to a certain extent. But in the end, the only way to figure it out is you have to do the research. So you have to talk to customers, and sometimes you can rule an idea out quickly. That's kind of a relief, but sometimes you actually, I spent 4 months on the idea that we killed, but I had looked at a bunch of other ideas that I spent 2 or 3 days on, and it is exhausting, but I think there's a moment where you kind of say, okay, do I want to spend the next 10 years of my life on this one? And if you haven't said no yet, you have to give it another day. And then you give it another day. And I think we reached the point where Laz and I said, this one's still holding up, so let's start to talk to some investors, and then they'll put us through our paces, and they do, and they, ring you out, with diligence and stuff. And if we make it through that initial set of conversations, we'll keep going. But it's very iterative.
So in regards to your gut feeling about Laz, you didn't know him before, and you spent 4 months on an idea that you ended up killing.
Right.
Why did you end up staying? Why did you decide to find another idea to continue with him?
Right. It's such a hard question, right? Yeah. Well, so what we realized was that we liked. So when you think about I know now because I've done this a bunch of times. What do you need in a co-founder? They need to pass the Chicago airport test. You know that one?
Yes.
You get stuck in Chicago overnight, and you're stuck, and you're wandering around, and it's like everything's closed, and you can't get any flights, and what are you going to do? And could you imagine being stuck with the person in that situation? Which has actually happened to me with JIT. That literal experience, it was just like, oh my god. You find the nearest bar.
JIT seems like it'd be fun at the Chicago airport.
He's so fun. He's so fun. But anyway, so
he's a nice guy too.
And terrific, terrific guy. So anyway, so I would say, Laz passed the Chicago airport test, but he also, I think, what we figured out was we liked working together, and we worked well in terms of the process. It was just that the idea itself wasn't strong enough, so that it was worth taking another shot. But the truth is that we sort of separated. He went off and came up with this new idea, and then we got back together. And that, there are a lot of odds that say that wouldn't have happened. Right. So, but it's really a partner. You're really finding a partner, and in the end, hopefully, you'll come up with something that even if it's not the perfect idea initially, you're going to keep morphing it anyway. That's the other thing. Right. Whatever the initial idea is not going to be the idea. So
if that was the right person.
Exactly.
It's just a comment. It seems like it's more so about the person. If you look at it like an onion, the core is the relationship with the person, and then kind of outside of that is the idea and what you want to go for. Would you agree or disagree with that?
You really need them both, because in the end, the idea has to be good enough to build an actual business on, not just get through some initial conversations. And you also need to be able to imagine that you would be able to raise multiple rounds of funding around it. So you need to have done the work on it. But what's also true is that very often startups will start with an initial idea, and what they end up shipping and then what they end up doing in their next version is so different anyway, that as long as there's some fundamental idea underneath it that isn't the specific thing but is a combination of expertise you both have, a market opportunity that looks like it's available to you, and that you think you have the expertise that would enable you to address it in some interesting way, that's often enough to start. It's not enough to get funded on. You need to refine it beyond that, but it's worth spending more time with the person.
Can you talk a little bit about that process of getting to those three things and focusing your search on the co-founder that way, and how those discussions go? It sounds like you had your market opportunity potentially in your area of interest, which helped you focus on the types of co-founders that would fit.
Definitely.
Potentially.
Absolutely. For me, that's how it works. I think other people do it different ways, but so I'll give you the example with Cloudswitch. I was reading a lot about cloud computing in 2008, which had already taken off for the developer community and the SMB community, and so it was already something that was showing up in the media. And I was thinking, oh, that's really interesting. I bet enterprise is really going to want to take advantage of it. I wonder how they'll do it. Because Netezza, we used to ship these huge $1 million systems into companies' data centers, and the data center was always out of power, always out of space, cost gazillions of dollars to run and maintain, and the customers were really, dealing with just all sorts of messy infrastructure things. So it seemed obvious that the cloud was going to have an impact on it. So I got teamed up with John Considine, who said, I have an idea about how you're going to connect a data center to a public cloud and solve security and networking problems. I was like, that's an interesting idea. Okay, well now how good is the idea? And then we spent months just running it down. But it did come from that perspective, as opposed to someone just had a technical idea and I hadn't really thought about how it might relate to a problem, because in the end I have to go sell the first customers and partners. So if I can't imagine how I'm going to get there, it's a big jump. I looked at things that were really cool ideas, but there was one that was in the retail space. There was one that was in a different area of technology to the SMB market, which is a smaller business market. I don't have the instincts on that, so it would have been harder.
This is I've been running through some ideas in my head, and so the question is, if you have your own money, and if you don't need someone else's money, then you can place bets on things that have not yet been clearly articulated to the market, right? So like one of those cliche things about you don't really know, you don't know what the customer really wants, a Steve Jobs kind of stuff.
Right.
So if you have the money, you can do that. But if you don't have the money, if you have to seek venture capital or other sources of funding, do you have to pull that back?
So, I don't do consumer and web stuff, but in that market I have friends who do, and the cost of entering the market is much lower and now has become yet even lower than it used to be. So the opportunity to do it, I think, is easier, right? Because you need a lot less capital. So I have friends who are not taking venture money, and they've already got stuff deployed at customer sites. So I think that there are, there's lots and lots of opportunities in that way. I happen to gravitate to things that either have hardware or are very heavily infrastructure related, and I knew that I was going to have to do a pretty significant institutional round to get this new company off the ground. But even when I think about it, you remember Mick from Kiva Software? So it's Kiva Systems, actually. So they got bought by Amazon. They had a great exit, but he ran that company from founding, where he used to describe how they're the robots in the warehouses that pick and pack and stuff like that, but they're software intelligence that tells them where to go. So it's an amazing idea. It was very ahead of its time. And he used to tell me about how he was maxing out his credit cards and sleeping on his friends' couches and doing all that stuff you read about in books, but I personally have never done, because I've only raised institutional money. But he did it, and it was for something that was more of an infrastructure thing, because he didn't want to take the venture money. So I don't think and that was he created an idea out of nowhere. And so I think it's possible, but you have to be willing to tough it out.
And what do you give up by trying to bootstrap it, versus take venture money? I mean, this is assuming there's an option, right? A lot of times there's not an option.
Exactly.
You kind of got to get the product
right,
to a
if you're
certain
looking
point
at
before anybody's going to invest in it. But,
right.
But what are the things that you potentially give up?
So I always felt that having when I was looking to start Cloudswitch, I was working with Matrix Partners, and they have a tremendous brand and are very well known and well regarded in the enterprise space. And I felt that what it gave me as a relatively young entrepreneur was it really helped me recruit the first 5 people, and it really helped me position the company in a way that had more attention than it probably should have gotten at that time, because all we had done was some PowerPoint. There was hardly any. There was no product. There was no nothing. But we were getting a lot of attention, and so you do pass up on that unless you're so famous yourself, right? Then you don't need that. But for me, as a younger entrepreneur who was really starting my first real company, I just thought it's a credential. It's something that will, and the venture people will really help you with their networks and early stage stuff. But obviously the costs are the costs, right? You're giving up control and ownership and stuff. So I think for some entrepreneurs, they just say, I'll tough it out. I'll just, on the strength of my personality, I'm going to get this thing off the ground. And then often it takes longer because you can't make big bets. You can only hire 2 people. You can't hire 10 people. So you have to be willing to take a pretty long-term view.
So you've been around venture capitalists and other investors and people you've worked with, probably including yourself, have made investments as angels, and you've kind of been around this whole investment side of the business for a long time now. What's your advice to these founders and potential founders as they think about angel investors, venture capitalists, where to invest their time, how to do the research, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's very tough, and actually it's much more complex. The options are much more complex than they were even 5 years ago, because now there are so many, so Andy Kelsey works with Andy Palmer, and he has Cola Labs and makes investments and stuff, and there's a generation of people who are angel investors who can do significant angel investing, right? It's not just little tiny seeds, they can put more capital to work. So you have a lot of choices about that, and I personally don't feel like I have the answer for any of it. It's always matching what the entrepreneur really wants to accomplish in their own lives, and a lot of it is control, and how much control are you willing to give up, and then matching that against how hard is it going to be to get the company off the ground if I don't take money. Is it just never going to get to the sort of takeoff point because I underfunded it? And I think the entrepreneur just has to be very honest with themselves. How willing are you to sleep on your friends' couches and max out your credit card? Is your spouse willing to do that, or your significant other? I mean, these are family decisions, and I also think that it's good now because there's so much of a stronger community of people to talk to that you could actually get information pretty quickly about, hey, for the thing I think I need to do and for the amount of money I need, what are 3 or 4 flavors of that I could look at? And you can get that information much faster. Whereas before it kind of felt a little bit like you had to go sort of to the official places and sort of go through an official process to raise the money. It was much more, it was much more formalized. And now it feels like it's a little bit more open, where the angel investors and the entrepreneurs themselves are really willing to help each other in terms of weeding out, hey, this isn't a good option for you because you're not ready yet. But if you could just get $1 million would help you. $200,000 sometimes is all that's needed, because you need to do the research. I have friends who have this issue where they can't afford to quit their jobs, but they need to quit their jobs to actually investigate an opportunity. So sometimes what they need is they need a couple $100,000 just to give them runway to bring one programmer and themselves to go work for 6 months or whatever the math worked out to be. So you have to be flexible.
And why do you think that's changed? I mean, it's certainly, I've been doing this for 15
years. I was going to say, why do you think that's
I've
changed?
been doing this for 15 years.
Better than I do.
And it certainly has changed dramatically, and I think a lot of it's just availability of information, right, about who's doing what.
Totally.
Just everything is so exposed and so out there, and, there's the proverbial, old boy network has been, it's still alive, but it's got some chinks in it. I mean,
right.
it's not what it once was.
Right,
there's a lot of competition, and you referenced for certain types of companies, the cost to start those companies have come down so dramatically that smaller investors, like angel investors, can have a much bigger impact on the early life of a company than they could have 5 years ago, and certainly more than they could have 10 years ago. So they're a lot more relevant. So it really does open up the options dramatically.
Also,
so there's a lot more competition.
I think the other thing that happened was the big guys got bigger, right? And so there are some here, but also in the West Coast, there are lots of billion and multi-billion-dollar funds where a deal that requires $12 million in a Series A, it doesn't come along every minute, right? That's a somewhat unusual thing that, for the nature of what we're doing, requires this large raise. So when you're that big, the question is how many of these smaller deals that only need a couple $1 million can you do and actually pay attention to them all and all that kind of stuff. So I think it created a white space. I think all of it is good for the entrepreneur. I truly do, because when I talk to friends who are trying to do this, they just feel that they have more choices about where they need to go to, and that maybe if the 1 or 2 or 3 people that were like the key decision makers for them in their past company, even if they don't like the idea or don't want to be in the space that the entrepreneur wants to be in, that doesn't mean that the story is closed for them. They can kind of keep going. So I think it's good.
The other, I guess the other thing that's emerged in the last 5 years or so is all these accelerator programs, and they go more to consumer and web app and that type of thing, not necessarily the industries that you've typically focused on. But what are your thoughts on Techstars, Mass Challenge, all the things going on?
I think it's terrific. I wouldn't claim to have a lot of exposure to it. I spent some time looking at them. I was actually over in Bolt. Do you guys know Bolt?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so Bolt is a hardware incubator. It's over on Chauncey Street downtown, and that was definitely right up my alley, because it was like a bunch of guys trying to figure out how to build things that were either, robotics or devices or medical devices or, consumer types of things that were somewhat capital intensive because of that, but also expertise intensive. where what they really needed before they were even ready to talk to a venture guy, for a long time, was how would you actually handle manufacturing, sourcing, partners who can help you, who might be willing to cut you favorable terms when you're just getting the initial prototypes built and stuff like that. That's not stuff that you know how to do right away out of school and even a few years in. So I think that is like fantastic, because otherwise what you would do is you keep betting on the same people over and over again who have done it at older companies, and how's the younger generation ever going to get going? So that's good.
So I'd love to hear some more questions from
let
you
me ask
guys.
you a question.
Sure.
So, when you're teaming up with someone, you think that you've got all the chemistry, et cetera, that you can work together. But eventually you're going to get to a point where you have disagreements.
Oh, yes.
And so I wonder about, do I take on a partner? I don't do that because I don't know how to do that. How do you handle that issue when you have these disagreements?
Oh, I don't know a set of co-founders who don't fight about your partner who's your co-founder and the fact that you're going to have disagreements inevitably, and then what do you do about it, right? How do you, what do you deal with? And I mean, I've only ever been, so I started, maybe it was good that I started in Israel, because screaming is part of the culture there. So, and I mean it literally, I know it's funny, but screaming is part of your daily schedule, right?
Yeah.
Today we shall have screaming at 4. So, you'd sit there and they'd be like, why are you saying that? That doesn't make sense. And so you better be very good at defending your point of view, and also kind of have a thick skin about it. Then you'd go out for dinner, who cares? So it was maybe good training. It was like boot camp. But the reality of it is, at Netezza, at Cloudswitch, at ClearSky, you're with people who by definition are passionate, intense people who have no patience and are smart. Now, hopefully they have a sense of humor too. Otherwise you might be in trouble. But their tolerance for, if you're not arguing your case well, or you're being too emotional and not looking at the data, is, 0. So I think that, whatever, people do things. I know founders who are single co-founders without a co-founder. I like it, because I think that it's hard without having someone that you can share everything with. So I'm CEO of the company. There are certain things that I can't share with anybody, but mostly with my co-founder, I could share everything. And I have to tell you, it's a comfort, where you can shut the door and you can kind of be like, this is not going well. We hired this wrong person. Something is not making sense in terms of our competitive, positioning or stuff like that. I think it's good to have people who can kind of, even if it's fighting, sort of push each other.
Brainstorming too.
Oh, for sure. But you're asking about the part that's not so fun, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You've had an experience where you failed, and then you've had experiences where you've been successful. In the failure one, you indicated that one of the things you learned was that maybe connecting with a more seasoned person was something you should have done. Was there something else that you learned in that first experience that may be important to let others know about?
So much of it was truly an experience, so the specifics don't matter. But one thing that happened was we didn't co-locate the go-to-market side of sales and marketing and product, management with the engineering team. The engineering team was sitting in Tel Aviv. And we were like, we'll just fly back and forth. No big deal, with these yelling, strong-willed people and stuff. And the truth is, for me, so maybe it's the wrong takeaway, but I would never allow a team in the early, first 10 to 15 people to be anything but co-located in one place, ever. Because so much happens that's just about the sitting in one space, and to the extent that I can shove them all in one room for the first, we just spent 2 months over at Highland Capital, which is one of our investors, all sitting around one space, 10 of us sitting around one conference table. And it was annoying and it was uncomfortable and we were making jokes about it, but I have to tell you, I think it was really good. Right? And now we're sitting in a little bit more space and I'm feeling a little anxious about that, we're making all the critical decisions about what the product is going to be, so you want it, very tight.
What was it like hiring your very first employee?
What was it like?
What was the experience?
Hiring?
And,
Wow.
And attracting.
Yeah. So actually, whatever. It's a long story. I hired even prior to starting that Israeli company that I mentioned. But the first time I really had to hire a key employee was at that company, and it's very scary because I certainly didn't know what I was looking for. But even when I think about it now, all the things you have to worry about that have to do with chemistry and fit, and whether you're betting on someone's expertise or whether you're betting on the fact that they're gonna be growing into certain types of things and how they're gonna relate to some of the other key people on the team. It's pretty complex. I should have been more scared than I was, is actually the truth. But a lot of it, I think, comes down to you have this, again, it's like a chemistry feeling. You know, you're sitting with the person and they've checked a set of boxes. I also reference check like mad. I'm like really intense about reference checking. Like I'll talk to 10 people as a reference check. But, you know, you're sitting with the person and just like I like to have interviews where you're sitting and talking about a problem and you're just problem solving together in the interview. I don't like the formal structured stuff because I feel like that's when the person gets to show whether they can do it or not. You know, you can't hire them temporarily, but at least you can spend a couple of hours with them saying, hey, this is something we're worrying about right now. Like if you were here today, what would you do about it? And so I like that.
Do things fall more on the foundation of knowledge that they had or the possibility to grow into the position?
So specifically originally, I was very heavily weighted to young up-and-coming people. You know, I thought, if you're smart enough, that's enough. I think since then I've evolved to, there are certain types of jobs where you must have certain expertise. You can't fudge it. I just hired now, just this week, a VP of operations for my company, and they're going to have to run a service that requires them to do a set of things. Honestly, you can't fake that, right? So it's not enough to be smart. You have to have had a certain number of war stories and, you know, just years of experience, which is different from you hire that young engineer who's not the first guy in necessarily, but he's the second guy in to a specific really important area of the product, and that guy can just be super smart, you know, because you're gonna mentor them, and you have to be willing to spend the time to do the mentoring.
How many employees do you have now?
We are 11.
At what point do you give that responsibility of hiring over to someone else? How do you do that? Do you hire an HR person? Do you outsource that?
Not for a while, truly, because every person, so like at Cloudswitch, I still was involved even when we got into like 20-ish, and I just met the person at that point. You know, I had a chance to sort of say yes or no of the people who were coming in at that later stage, but anyone who's in the initial team, all the way through the key architects, the people who are the executive people, the people who are in important roles that are going to be in strategic functions, even if they're a little bit more junior and you may at some point decide you want to hire in someone who's more senior, it doesn't matter. You're betting the company on them, and so I don't think you can outsource that. And it's even more because it's about how they get along with you and your co-founder. You know, you're going to be spending a lot of time working together.
So it's like the third level down or so before you start to think about hiring an HR person to help you with that selection.
You can have an HR person help you, but mostly on the logistical things, which is sourcing candidates, putting them through the interview process, scheduling, helping you schedule calls for references and stuff to make it a little bit easier because as you scale.
Really involved in the ultimate
I can't think of anything more important, honestly. I mean, when I think about my time right now, like, what else is there to do except get the right set of people in the room and make sure that they understand what the ideas are and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely for the next, at least the next wave, we're gonna be very hands-on.
But that gets me to another question, if you don't mind, a second one.
Sure.
And that issue of time, it's so hard. It's never enough time. So how do you push that out? How do you, so that you can do what you need to? I'm sure you've run into that all the time.
The recruiting is so unbelievably important that you just have to do it. There's just no escaping. Because how can somebody else know what you need? A lot of it is just about how you and that person interact and how they interact with the other people on your team, and then you sit and you talk about it. So there are things you can let go, you know, administrative things. I have people who help me with a bunch of, you know, more back office-y kinds of things to try to push a lot of that out, but this is one that you got to hold on to, in my opinion.
So time priority on that one.
Definitely.
One of you had a question on this.
Okay,
No,
so
my question was going to be an extension. In my mind, I was thinking that as the company goes bigger and there's an operational aspect to it, which
Right.
is somewhat well established, defined, and routinized,
Then the head
then
of
you
the
can
group
kind of
can take it from there.
Take it from there.
Right.
But it's, I think what I'm hearing more is like conceptually when you're still exploring and still kind of, you know, not completely certain.
Right.
That's when you absolutely need to be
Right, because what if you hired someone who was very narrowly operationally focused on some particular thing, and then you change the direction?
Right.
Well, they better be awfully great otherwise, right? So.
So from an entrepreneurial perspective, let's say, for example, I've always worked for mid to larger size companies and not really had that entrepreneurial experience, but I have a lot of, amazing ideas that I want to experiment with. Do you think that, based on your story, what you just told, do you think it makes sense to go work for a small startup to get that experience, or do you think that you can take some of those experiences and apply them, through your knowledge and find a founder, another co-founder, to just go for it?
So, probably we should talk further, and I can be more helpful. But generally speaking, what I would say is, it's not a bad idea to live in the startup world for a bit, to just make sure you love it. Because it's very glamorized right now. It's so what everybody talks about and everything. Everybody's a billionaire and they sold this for this amount of money and stuff. And so it's getting a lot of media hype. And the reality of the day-to-day of it is extremely not like that. And so you want to, before you jump in completely, you might want to think about being in one to just see what it is and that you have the, the passion for it and stuff like that. And of course, it's hard for me to say that to you because I didn't do that. I just jumped right in and whatever. But I think there's an aspect of making sure you know what the lows are, because in a startup, the highs are really high and the lows are super low. So you just want to have seen what the roller coaster experience is.
And I guess, do you see it being that, let's say that in my current job role, I do experience highs and lows because I'm in sales. So I do feel the highs and the lows.
Right.
I know
You've had the adrenaline rush.
I understand that perspective of it. But I'm just wondering, and even though I worked for large companies, they kind of operated in small business-like ways. So I feel like, okay, I understand, Right. So, yes, I lost the question, but I'll come
happy
back
to talk
it.
more. But, you've gotten close enough that you feel like I'm ready to go, and then there's the logistical side of how would you get going as a first-time entrepreneur. There's that question, and then there's I'm still figuring out what kind of a startup I might want to be personally involved with, and then it's not a bad idea to see some models.
Well, I guess a part of it is that I'm also changing industries a little bit, so I'm moving from medical to more, it's still got an element of health care related, but it's different. And so I'm wondering that, I'm just wondering about when you do that, what kind of expertise, if I do want to have the flavor of a startup from, completely different industry,
right.
How do you get into that without having that knowledge of that specific industry?
If you're starting your own startup and you want to be able to attract a team and raise some kind of capital, whatever it is, whatever format of that it's going to take, you want to be credible on at least a couple of dimensions. So one is the operational area of sales is something you have expertise in, and then the other is often that you want to be in some sort of domain area that you can be credible on. And the domain doesn't have to be healthcare, but it might be, in my area it's enterprise. So enterprise spans a lot of industries, but it's still a certain type and shape of customer. So you need to have some credibility on that, and you also need to show that you would be able to manage a team. So there's some sort of leadership aspect too that you need to be able to show. So you kind of want to feel like you're strong enough on a few of those axes that you could support a funding process or a getting it off the ground process. And if you're not sure you have that yet, then it's probably good to go somewhere as a step this way and then come back over before you try to go right at it.
Or would it be, would it make sense at that point then to find a partner that would fill in the gaps?
That helps too. If you're incredibly strong on a couple of things and you can find someone who fills in a couple of the pieces in the industry area that you're focused in, that could be enough.
So I want to pick up on, you referenced we're in a good environment, or we're in an environment where founders are basically being sort of sensationalized and glamorized, right. And that is the case. But I mean, you've worked in startups from '98 till now.
I've seen a lot of ups
through
and
booms and busts, and it
yeah.
is a great environment right now. But how much does that matter? In terms of what you're trying to do, and certainly the wins at your back from a financing
right.
perspective and that type of thing, but how do you think about the macro environment that you're in?
Well, there are times when it's very tough to get a company off the ground, right? And so, and now I've seen it a couple of flavors. So when we were doing, during .com craziness, it was like, sky's the limit, very out of control, very, in some ways, too easy to do it. when JIT raised money at Netezza, it was in nuclear winter of 2000.
Yeah.
And right, it was already, things had already collapsed, and then then they went into 9/11, and it was a terrible time. And in fact, very few companies did get started then. He happened to be strong enough to be able to get the company off the ground, and he always said that it turned out to be a great time because no other competitors got started for like 3 years after that. So it gave us a head start. But so I've seen that happen, and I think what at Cloudswitch, actually, we got funded. Literally, it was like 2 weeks before, in 2008, the financial collapse. I think if we had been a month later, we would not have gotten funded, truly. So we were able to close the Series A and get off the ground, and thank God we did. So, I guess because I've seen the sort of this pattern of it, what I would say is it's not so much about what happens right at the beginning, even though it can definitely help to raise money at better terms and all. It's that that within a couple of years where you might hit some cyclicality that's bad, you're going to have to raise more money.
Yeah.
One way or the other, or you're going to have to convince customers to buy, and they're freaking out because they're also in a tough place. So I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but I try to not think about it so much. Because whatever the stage is, by the time you're at the next phase of the company, it's going to have changed.
Well, there's certainly not much you can do about it.
And there's nothing you can do about
Right.
it. Exactly. You can try to protect yourself by, one of the pieces of advice I've gotten over and over again from mentors is when you have a chance to raise money, raise as much as you can. Because you just don't know. And you reach a point, and it can be a moment where it's not the right moment, and so you don't want to get caught with that. So I've taken that very much to heart.
Yep.
And I've done it.
Talk a little about what you mentioned earlier about just the opportunities where people are looking for funding, where you're leaving a job or just like trying to start something up, but not having the windfall to do that. And talk about examples of what that is, or what you. What?
So let me make sure I understand the question. So when somebody when someone wants to do something like that but doesn't have, they haven't cashed out at something, or they're not independently wealthy or whatever it is, right? What is that like?
More just financing the startup period, right?
Right.
The period where you're sort of figuring out the focus, sort of looking for a focus, all of those things.
Right. So some of the people I saw at Bolt were in that situation where Bolt gave them, there was some like stipend, there was an initial small equity position, and they gave them free space and access to a lot of support and infrastructure to work with, so that they didn't have to spend the capital on it. And that helps a lot, because then you have to either be able to just live without a paycheck or pay yourself some small amount of money to just keep yourself going.
Yeah.
And Dan, you may know better than I do. I'm not familiar with the other flavors of that model, but I saw it firsthand where there were people who, they quit their jobs and they were really living, on very low level. And it's, I'm sure they go home and talk to their partner and spouse, and it's a tough conversation, right? Like how much longer is this going to go on for, and what if things don't get off the ground and all that sort of point. So it does put a lot of pressure. I've also seen people who have been able to get, through some of the programs that are out here, like some sort of, there's like award money, where you compete and you can win, sort of prize money, and I've seen people do that to keep things going. But, I wouldn't minimize that it's tough, and that it's really a decision about, you have to say, how long can I go financially where I make either this minimal amount of money or no money, and what happens at the end of that period if things haven't taken off? What's my plan B? I happened to be fortunate when I did it early on that my husband was working, so we just decided we would try to make a go of it like that. But I gave myself 6 months, because after that I had to get a job. So, it's very focusing.
Well, so I see this a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say, Dan, I bet you have some better ideas.
I see this a lot, and in addition to everything that Ellen just put out there, a lot of people, when they're thinking about doing something, they go ahead and ratchet back to. You're still in. I don't know what you do, but you're still in your job, whatever it is, making your market salary, but you start to ratchet back your expenses, and for one thing, to get a baseline of sort of this is what it might be like, because I'm relying on my partner's salary, or I'm living off savings or whatever, and then also just accumulate some of those savings. And it's almost like venture capital, right? It's almost like I'm making this investment in myself. I'm buying myself 6 months, 12 months of runway to be able to explore, finding an idea, finding a co-founder, whatever it is, working on the idea, hopefully. But, whatever it is, like I've certainly seen a lot of people do that. So, it's a year out from when they plan to go live,
Yeah.
They're relying on their corporate salary or whatever they have, but they're starting to sort of, save with that entrepreneurial mindset in mind.
Yeah.
So I definitely see that a lot.
Yeah.
And if you can time that with like a big corporate bonus, that's perfect.
I was going to say,
And
and
then
if
start-
you happen
and
to
then
win
start
the
right
lottery
after that.
between now and then that's even better.
But it's just an
So,
interesting balance
okay.
of like how much you draw that down, and like
Yeah.
because you could accumulate pile savings too, and it's like, am I investing all of that
Right.
in this? Am I going to
Right.
somehow bootstrap that with other options? Like
Absolutely.
an Uber driver.
Yeah.
You should drive Uber. You could start
Exactly.
on the side. You should. Well, you could. That would help.
You
start
have to
something
plan
else.
that it's always going to take 2 to 3 times as long and like could be 5 times more money than you think it's going to take to get
Yeah.
these things off the ground. And so you don't want to have box yourself into a corner. That's the most important thing, where you realize all of a sudden I simply have to get a job, but I haven't started a job search, or I have to do something that would actually enable me to get to this next stage with this company, but I don't have the money to do it. Because what a shame that would be too,
Yeah.
right? So, you just have to kind of get your head around.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so lead in to this question. Giving yourself running room, but you still have to set up milestones when you're dealing with VC money. Because they're looking how to measure you, and they're saying at this point, blah, blah, blah is going to happen, and I hope that you remember you have to do that. So from the point of view of the co-founder, you want to have as much running room as you can. How do you have any advice to startups on that issue? Because you have to set up milestones pretty early when you have a VC money.
Are you talking about pre-raising your first venture money, or you're saying once you have the venture money?
Once you're in negotiations with the venture firm,
Yep.
you're setting up milestones. They're expecting you to reach certain stages, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, the honest truth about a Series A as opposed to a B and for sure a C is that in the Series A, there really aren't milestones. There's just certain checklist things you have to prove that you have. Because it's very hard. I mean, I got funded twice on PowerPoint, right? So it's very hard to have something.
Right.
There are other companies where a whole product has been developed, and that's something that you can go then take to raise money on at better terms and stuff. For me, it's too capital intensive for me to do it. So what did we have to have? We had to have myself and my co-founder with a certain set of credentials and background. We had to have people who were willing to be super referenceable about, willing to reference us, very strongly. We had to show that we could pull in an initial team quickly, and we needed to be able to identify names of people who we would, as soon as we had money, be able to hire. And we needed to have done the market research that showed that there was, a set of customers who would take a reference call and say, yeah, this is a great idea, and if it existed, I would buy it. And, some partners in the industry who would say, yeah, this seems like a really good idea, and I would work with a company like this if they came and wanted to partner. That's what we needed. So how long does it take from when the venture person says, I think that's an interesting idea, why don't we go into diligence? It can be months, right? It's possible that it could be months.
Right.
So, and it's probably a longer conversation. I don't know if that's probably not even the question that you're asking, but how do you keep that process moving in a timely way so that it doesn't just go on indefinitely? And how do you also show that you've ticked the boxes? A lot of it is that you're clear with the venture person up front about what do they need to see, or where are they worried? If they're not giving you a yes, it presumably means that they're worried about something. So can you ferret out what are the pieces that are missing so that you can make them more comfortable? And usually it's a product market fit problem, right? If you're credible as an entrepreneur in some way, it's either that or they're not comfortable with the team. It's always one of those two things.
Yeah.
So you got to get them comfortable. Sometimes you have to add another co-founder to the team, or show that you could hire someone as soon as you get funded. That will fill things in a little.
And VCs are not very good at saying no.
They don't tell you.
Yeah,
So you have
so,
to be like,
yeah, how do you do that?
So what I've done, and this is, I've made a point of it in the two companies, was I had independent board members who also were investors, but they were independent board members who were there for me. So they were not there to sort of be part of the institutional money. They were there to put their own money in if they chose to, but more to just be advisory to me. And they happened to be people who had good relationships with the venture people because they've been in the Boston area for a while. And so what could happen is there could be a conversation in which that person could say, I either know or I feel that some of the areas that are not going well right now or that don't feel comfortable are around this issue. And so that they could in some way help get that information out, because sometimes it's hard. I mean, VCs they're not looking to piss you off and tell you that your idea is bad or that they don't think you're strong enough. And they see things all the time that kind of iterate, and the first thing wasn't good, but then your third idea turns out to be good. So they'll just keep going. But it's actually not getting you any closer to money than when you started. And so sometimes having someone who can a little provide that sounding board where they're willing to tell you the truth a little bit more is good. Like, so Andy Palmer is a entrepreneur. He's a parallel and serial entrepreneur. He's a guy who has done a lot of things here. And I think he could, he's the kind of guy who could say to you, Ellen, if they don't like this, they didn't tell me that, but I can tell from the body language that's what's going on. So I invested a lot of time in my personal life trying to build relationships with mentors who I thought could just give you the harsh truth, and then they're there for you when things are tough, and I can't say enough about that. And then I want those people on my board because then they're sitting in the meetings and they can sort of read the room and tell you what's happening.
So you mentioned Andy
and Jet
and Paula.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a bunch of names that have come up. Like, how do you, for the people in the room, how do you get to those mentors?
Well, I worked with both of Andy and Jed. So it evolved. I worked for Jed, and Andy is a personal relationship. But the specifics for me don't matter to you guys. I think what matters is think about people in your lives who have been successful in a business that you've had association with, who either have raised money themselves or have been part of some sort of a capital related type of a process. So they're people in finance, they could be people in law, they could be people who themselves are entrepreneurs, and think about how they might be able to help you and advise you, because often those people work closely with the venture community. So they can make introductions and they can also help you navigate it. It sounds like there's quite the party going on out there. I don't want to keep people from this party out here. I feel bad, Don't be polite. If you guys are ready to go, you definitely. Anyway.
What other questions?
I was going to say other questions, or did I answer? I don't know if I answered that one. But.
No, it's good.
I have a question. It's kind of off the side topic. It's not so much about investing, but if someone has an idea that could change a lot of things, in what direction, how do you go? Where do you go? How do you find people? To just blow me because I have the seed.
Right.
And I have no idea where to maybe whisper.
Right.
The seeds to.
Well, are you looking to start something yourself, or you want to give the idea to someone else to do it?
I would love to give the idea to someone else, because I always have great ideas. I just don't know how to implement them. So this would be more to give to someone else for them to implement it. It's just, I think it's an amazing idea. You know what I'm talking about. And it's just a way it's almost a different way of farming.
So am I not jumping on it?
No, it's just I don't know where to go.
Sounds like you have someone here who wants to.
It would involve a lot of money and a lot of people and a lot of farmers and engineers and educational things. But it's also a way to raise money and to help the ecosystem as well, especially in our country.
Right. So without knowing the particulars of the idea, and I'm sure there's confidentiality about it and stuff like that, generally what you want is you want to find somebody who is looking for a great idea in the area that you're focused on. And so to me, I just made the rounds of people who are themselves, like this, like people in the entrepreneurial community who are looking to find either a co-founder or they have some initial ideas themselves, and your idea layered on top of what they're already trying to do would be a better idea. And I hate to say it because I know this is probably not the answer that you want, but you just keep kissing frogs is the way this goes. That's the expression people always use, which is you just have to meet with a lot of people and be willing to sort of selectively share the information about what it is. Either it's confidential or it's not. You have to decide if it is.
It's really not.
And keep bouncing it off. I tend to talk about my ideas until I've decided where I'm going, and then I get very paranoid about not sharing it. But when I'm still thinking about a lot of things, I just want to meet with a million people and sort of say, what do you think about this idea? Do you like that idea? Do you think that's a possible thing? So you need the person who's themselves the entrepreneur who would be looking for that.
Right.
And the only way to do that is to be in places like this where people are just meeting, talking, and stuff like that. Right? That's really the best way to do it, because you're not at a point yet where you're going to go to a seed person or an angel investor and tell them the idea, because you haven't kind of put some of the pieces together behind it, probably, right? They don't need an idea; they need a team that can execute an idea. So you need the person.
And that's a big part of what TCN, the Capital Network, is trying to do. So I mean, it's programs and networking opportunities, and I mean, it's basically those two things. So it's education and networking, usually in the form of programs, to get people thinking about what needs to be in place to be able to make something real, which usually involves raising some kind of capital or getting some kind of outside funding. So, I mean, that's, Meredith can share a lot of information, or you can go to capitalnetwork.org and look at what we're doing there, but it's basically a curriculum that sort of goes through thinking about a company to getting a company funded. I mean, that's sort of the timeline that we're dealing with and trying to address. And a lot of it is just getting the right people in the room together so those conversations can happen. But then we put, sort of the level of, or a layer of education, and topical material on top of it as well. So, but that's a big part of what we're trying to do at the TCN. Well, are there other questions sort of for the whole table? Because we've probably got some time for stuff like that.
Yeah,
if you want to do
I
it.
don't know. I'll just stay for a couple extra minutes.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice
Thank
to
you,
know
Ellen.
you.
That's great.